Dr. Natalie Kupperman, an assistant professor at the University of Virginia School of Data Science. Dr. Kupperman is an applied sports science researcher and a certified athletic trainer. Her research focuses on utilizing biometrics, wearable technology, and athletic monitoring methods to reduce injury and optimize athletic performance. Before joining the School of Data Science faculty in 2022, Dr. Kupperman earned her PhD in Education Kinesiology and Sports Medicine and a Master's in Education and Athletic Training from the University of Virginia. She also holds a Bachelor's in Science from the University of Wisconsin, La Crosse, not the sport, but the location. Dr. Kupperman's research interests involve developing data infrastructure and pipelines for collaboration in athlete and athletic monitoring, creating dynamic models of injury risk and athlete readiness, and establishing seamless monitoring environments for sports teams. Her work has been published in several notable journals, such as the Journal of Athletic Training and Frontiers of Sports and Active Living. And so please join me in welcoming Dr. Natalie Kupperman.
Hi, I think my mic is on and good. Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Finn. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today, talking about something that I care a lot about, and that is how we communicate. And given that my background is in sports, and mostly sports medicine, I like to talk about how do we communicate really effectively in sports. And I feel like the panel before me really teed me up for this talk, talking about how important it has been in their jobs. And so why, or how did I come to care so much about communicating in sports? Well, like Finn said, I actually am clinically trained as an athletic trainer, and a lot of my original work started with understanding how do we take technology, this vast information, and distill it down for people like athletic trainers, physical therapists, physicians to use and to make an impact on the athletes and the patients they serve. And so to do that, you have to be a highly effective communicator. And so I actually teach a class here at the school called Communicating with Data. So if there's any major students in here, you'll be taking it next spring, so get excited. And so I decided to do a talk today kind of playing off of things we talk about in that class. So often when we think about sports analytics, we think about numbers and modeling. We think about how do we take the X's and O's that are on the field, the pitch, the court, and how do we turn it into numbers or a model that we can quantify, we can change, we can manipulate. Things like how do we do player evaluation. And so, things often end up looking like this. So I've been very fortunate to sit through a lot of presentations, both at conferences and in coaching staff meetings, where people present models. And so like at a conference, the person does their 20-minute talk. It's really great. The first question is usually from a fellow mathlete who's been shaking since slide 2, super excited about ask about the random Greek letter in the second slide. And so all of the mathletes rejoice that the question is answered. And then the next person stands up. And their question is always, who cares and why does it matter? And I've seen so many people at conferences fail on this question. We often forget, how do we take these complex things that we are trying to model in the world and give it to the person who cares? And so my goal by the end of this talk is through some fun examples, and I've invited some friends on screen who can articulate this much better than I can and have other experiences than me, to first convince you that communicating is just as important as the models themselves, and that secondly, that you should take time when you are developing models to also be thinking about what's the end product, the report, the dashboard, the thing that your users are going to use to interpret your model and the data that you put in front of them. So we're going to start. This is we're going to watch a little clip from MIT Sloan. This was actually at last year's conference. And I love when I'm sitting in those rooms and the panel is up there, and then someone starts talking, and they give this nugget, and I'm like, if all my students were here, I am so glad that they just said the one thing that I harp on in class all the time, but these people are much cooler than I. And so I like it when they tell you all the things I think are important. So we'll watch this clip. Specifically, Dejan Mitkovsky, who is the VP of Data Analytics at FanDuel, is actually going to give a response to an answer from the audience.
So transitioning a little bit to some of the people, I think an interesting question here. So as use cases have evolved, what skills or roles are you looking for that maybe you weren't before, whether that's 3 or 5 years ago? And is there kind of a new role in the organization?
Here, I'll jump in.
Yeah.
My number one trait for anyone who's in data, who's in analytics, is curiosity.
Yeah.
You have to be curious. Like, I want people to think about things we've never thought about. I want people to go, wow, what if I combine these things together? What if I turn it in this way? And, oh, this is a new insight. What does that do for the business? And so curiosity, I think, is key. The second biggest thing, and Carlos was getting into this earlier, it's storytelling.
Yeah.
Guys, if you spin data up, you can have the most beautiful insight that's transformative to your entire business. But if you don't know how to communicate that to the business, it's actually not worth anything, right? And so for the students and even the younger professionals, like, work on that storytelling, right? Work on how can I take this and what does it mean to the business? How can I dissolve this into a very simple nugget, right? It's not about spreadsheets and spreadsheets of data. It's about one little insight and then what it can do for you.
Right.
So those are the things. It's a little bit of the softer skills because the technical skills, a lot of people have already.
Right.
So I'd lean
The
into
curiosity is going to push that third why in terms of why is this happening? What does that mean to the business? And then how can you tell the story around
That's right.
those pieces too?
That's right.
Okay, so super pertinent. I went to this conference, and like the next day I came back to teach class. I was like, you guys have to watch this clip. And so I made my class watch it. This also, hopefully they thought it was as cool as people who like sports. So I think he says a lot of really interesting things. First is being curious, and we just heard that in the last panel too, being a lifelong learner. But then second is the storytelling. And I think when we often think about storytelling as data journalism, but anyone who works with data can storytell in multiple different ways. And I hopefully will show you some of these examples as we move through. This requires a little audience participation. So who do we think is the most important person on a team in terms of analytics when we're talking about sports teams? Whoever wants to give a shout, you can somebody a shout out an answer. Yeah. Yeah. So who's like the CEO of sports? The coach, exactly. So usually it's the coach. We could argue that if we're working on like front office stuff, it would be the GM or something like that. But on the field, it's the coach. No matter what you do, at the end of the day, the coach has to approve what's happening because the buck stops with them. Okay, I got one more MIT snippet because I think it's one of the best talks I've heard at MIT Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. I recommend, if you want to do sideline analytics, watching the full thing. But this is Philip Chang. He is the lead data analyst for the LA Lakers. This talk is now a couple years old, so some of the references are slightly outdated, but still gets the point across. And he does a great job discussing how he communicates with the head coach. And then after this, we're going to dive into some examples of how we communicate data with coaches, specifically in that sideline context.
So kind of like I alluded to, the communication and the relationship is the most key part to disseminating in-game analytics, right? Like I said with Brandon Staley, myself and Coach Vogel, we have a really good relationship. We're on the phone all the time. We talk about trends. But early on in my tenure with the Lakers, this wasn't true, right? So the first few years I was with the team, there were two players that kind of didn't seem like it made sense to play with each other, okay? I'm not going to tell you who it is, sorry. But it just didn't make sense, but they had only played 30 minutes together all year, and they both handled the ball a lot, and it was really interesting to watch them play together. And we were really good in the minutes they played together, and we ran a bunch of, we had a couple internal think pieces about it, ran a bunch of simulations of what it'd be like to play them together against contending teams, and we were really happy with that. But then we brought it to the coach, and 5 minutes through this meeting that we called specifically for this topic, like I said, hard to get coaches in the room. The coach interrupts me and goes, yeah, but they hate each other. You're not going to play them together. They hate each other, like hate each other. And I was just like, okay, well, I just wasted my time. I just wasted the coach's time. I just wasted everyone's time because our line of communication was not open. And since that time, I've spent a lot of effort and, went through a lot of like active, you're outside the friend group trying to like meet people, right, kind of thing, just to get a little bit more in touch with the trends and patterns that the team is taking, right? It's a lot of I hear you, which is goes both ways, right? The way I look at it, the old school versus new school is not a battle. It's more you're on the same team, us versus decision, right? And so we're thinking about us versus the decision. It's a lot less about like, am I right or are you right? It's a lot more about like, let's try to weigh each side appropriately. One book I really liked reading recently was Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. She's a pro poker player. I'm not sure if she's come to us before. She may have. But basically how she frames it sometimes is I learn as much from the bad hands as I do from the good ones, right? And so maybe I'm not as aggressive as maybe some of my counterparts, but if I talk to the coach and I talk to the GM or whoever, and the decision is out there, and I'm confident they've heard me and they're like, yes, I understand what you're saying, we're going a different direction for XYZ reason. I'm actually pretty okay with that because at least I know that's in the back of their head, number one. And number two, if the decision, if I feel pretty good about something, I'm like, all right, you let's see what you're made of, right? If the decision goes poorly, then I'm sort of like, you're right. But if the decision goes well, everyone's happy. So no skin off my back. The point being that we're all working towards the same endpoint, and the process that we get there is definitely going to be one of collaboration moving forward. And that leads to the sideline, right? With the common language as well, we need to build a form of vocabulary that every coach likes to say, oh, my double call is blue. And another coach says, my double call is black. No matter what it is, just adopting that vernacular really helps when getting down to the sidelines. And part of that vocabulary is with the visualizations. So you need to have very simple and to the point vises. And anyone who's worked with like any corporate leader could tell you, if it has more than like 8 words, and this might be too many on the slide, you've buried the lead, right? You want to lead with what is most important. If I were to tell you, okay, the Warriors play Draymond and Steph in the first quarter, they bring them in halfway through the second quarter at the end of the half, and rinse and repeat, right? That's easy. But if I told you the Jazz played Mitchell, Gobert, Conley together first, took out Gobert, then took out Conley, put Mitchell back in by himself in the second quarter, and then put him back in the end of the second half, you'd be like, what the hell are you talking about, right? Like Zach Galifianakis up here. But distilled in the visualization that's easily repeatable and told to coaches in a narrative-based manner, it's really useful, right? So we use something similar to this. This is from the excellent folks over at 538 to distribute sub-patterns, right? X-axis being as the game goes on. So you can see like the different color areas correspond to when their combinations of players are in. So you see Golden State on the left, very, very straightforward. We don't even need the chart for that. But the piece on the right, despite it being much more complicated, it actually is similarly rigid in how Coach Quinn Snyder at the time last year staggered his star teammates. And so actually these are very similar games to prepare for, unlike coaches that like to lacrosse or hockey sub here and there. But without seeing this data presented like this, Coach Frank is left kind of in the dark, saying, oh, I need to prepare for like this many different permutations, but I don't know when they're going to play, that kind of thing. It's easier for me to show this and be like, there you go, as opposed to try to communicate sometimes using words, which is funny, right? But using intuitive and clear visualizations is really key to me to communicating to coaches on the sideline.
Okay, so a few things that he says in there that I think are really important are first, he doesn't say this, but he's getting to it, is that there's a lot of egos in sports, in the players, in the coaches, and people around the team. And as the analyst, you're the one who can't have the ego. You can think that your model is the best thing ever, but if the coach doesn't want to hear about it or talk about it, you just have to let it go and be very non-precious about the things that you build. And I love the way he frames the old school versus new school. Often when I sit on panels or have dinner conversations with people, people often ask, so what do you do, or what do you do when you encounter a coach who doesn't like to use analytics? And I think the way that Philip frames that in the fact that it's not an old school versus new school approach. It's us, the team, versus a decision. That reframing of that problem is key. And I think you can even think about that beyond sports, right? So I think those are two things off the bat that he talked about that I really wanted to make sure were emphasized. And then let's get into some of the visualizations. How do we now take data and make visuals? All of us here as humans know that we often interpret data better when we can see it visually. It's a little faster for us to process. And so this is one of the charts that Philip had in his talk, and I just grabbed it from 538 to pull up here larger. So the x-axis here, and it's really across the top axis there, are the quarters of an NBA game. And then down the side here are all the games of the NBA, and the colors are coded for players. So if it's this navyish purple color, that is both Davis and James playing together on the team. If it goes to light blue, that is only Davis playing. And then pink is only James playing. And then again, it's blue. So we see a pattern here. We see a pattern of how the coach subs in his star players. So you can imagine where this is really useful for scouting, right? And I have a couple students here today who are working on lineup analysis. And when we look at those, when we just look at it in numbers, it's impossible to quickly see a trend of lineups. But when you distill it into colors and break out the key points, because for the scouting report, we want to know when these two power players are playing. It becomes really easy to digest and tells a narrative. The other thing that 538, and granted they're a journalist site, so they do this really well. The New York Times does this well, others do it well. Never bury the lead. If you look at the top, it doesn't say, quarter, what quarter, like an X versus Y type title. It tells you exactly the story that the person making it wants you to know. The Lakers get power paired together at the start, middle, and end of the game. So if the coach doesn't even scan their eyes down to your visual that you probably worked hours and hours on, they at least know what the data that you looked at and modeled was interpreted as, right? And that's powerful. And I often tell students, no matter what you're building a graph for, always have your title be what you want your person to take away. Like, don't make your reader interpret the graph or the data. That's your job. You're the analyst, not the reader or the consumer of the data. And so here we have same type of graph, but now we're looking at the Golden State Warriors, and these are for 20 to 21 games. But now we see like a different strategy here. So they are playing their two power players together more frequently together instead of individually like we saw the Lakers do more of. And again, they don't bury the lead. It's straight up in the front. Golden State keeps their stars together. And you're probably going to see these stars together in the beginning and the middle of the game. It's really easy, and it's really intuitive. Okay, we have football fans in here. Everyone's probably watched a football game. Coaches have always carried clipboards, right? Like, you're going to become a coach, someone gifts you a clipboard, and someone gifts you a whistle. Like, it's like the coaching things, right? But around 1992, I think is when we first saw these appear on the sidelines with the Green Bay Packers, actually. We saw these laminated sheets of paper show up, and they've only gotten larger. And so now I think like Andy Reid's is one of the biggest in the league right now. But what they are is different situations in a football game and different options for the coach to pick based on what situations playing out on the field. And so it's kind of like a menu, you pick one, you find your situation, and then you have a list of options underneath. Sometimes they use it for actually making a decision, and sometimes they use it just to wave in the air with anger. So, it kind of depends on your coach. This was actually from the Alabama game this weekend. I was watching the game, and this showed up, and I didn't get my phone up fast enough to take a picture of the screen. So I went back later when the video was posted, and I was like, I'm gonna find that picture, that screenshot. But often in football games, you'll get they'll give you a shot into the play calling booth. And what do you see now? You see a couple tablets, but you see sheets and sheets of paper with analysis. And these play coaches very quickly have to see what's going on in the field, go through their different, these are the same ones the coaches have on the field, they're just not laminated. No one's worried about Gatorade, I guess, up in the play booth. But then you see this binder, and these are really what you see on these sheets. And I can't be for certain what Alabama's has in there, but I'm guessing these are almost like survival curves. If you do like health informatics stuff, or health biostats, survival curves of different situations in the game and the probabilities of different plays working in different situations. And look at this binder. It's like, it's not small. And you think like, why would they not use technology? But you realize that it's actually easier to flip through here than flip through the iPad. And so there are people on these teams, and this is college, but in professional leagues, who people are running the models, but then someone has to design these. And the better they're designed, the better chance that your coaches can use the hard information that use your hard work in pulling out and extracting these insights, right? So we don't just think about making one graph, we think about how do we even make it so, this gets down to more like how do humans ingest information and find information quickly? And that becomes almost a psychology of data viz. Okay, baseball. I tried really hard to find a good baseball example. I have another baseball example later on. But baseball is interesting because you have in the dugout analytics, and most MLB teams have an analyst in the dugout, and the coaches have access to stuff in the dugout. But what I think is the hardest problem in baseball, after you get through making the model, is the base coaches. Sometimes you'll see them with an actual piece of paper that they'll fold up into their back pocket. But they also almost always have like a playing card. Like it's like a playing card size that has all the same information, but distilled down onto that little card. So now we're thinking about, how do you minimize and scale for somebody to quickly pull out and look at something and make a decision in a game? And I think that's a really unique thing to have to design and communicate to somebody quickly. This was supposed to be a joke, but then I realized they have analytics. Anyone know who this woman is? Any hockey players? Any hockey fans, I should say? This is Jessica Campbell, first female NHL coach. She is coaching the Kraken this is her first year coaching the Kraken as an assistant coach. Hockey is like notorious for not using a lot of sideline analytics. If you watch hockey, if you don't realize what's happening, you see the coaches looking down a lot, and there's actually screens in the floor. So they're looking down for replays. They have a tablet often too, and you can see they have paper. But I joke that the coaches' reports for hockey are just them with their arms crossed, because when you watch hockey, that's the only way a coach stands. But they do use sideline analytics, but they obviously aren't holding big laminated sheets like football is. So this is just different culture and different sports that you have to know as you work your way up as an analyst. Another question, slightly different than the first. So who's the most important person in professional sports? Anyone have a guess or an answer? The consumer, so the fan, right? Professional sports don't exist if there's no fans. So how do we engage fans and keep fans' attention and then hopefully earn some of those fans' hard-earned dollars? So this is an Instagram account actually called Sportsball. Anyone follow Sportsball in here? Okay, if you don't, you're going to probably, after today, if you have Instagram. Two things on the person who runs this account. He hand draws all of his graphics, which is phenomenal. But it is so engaging for fans of sports. And so let's watch it, then we'll talk a little bit about it.
What's the best sport to watch for casual fans? In honor of the sports equinox this month, we gathered data on playing time from one game each in the MLB, NFL, NHL, and NBA. Then we categorized every second of the broadcast into in-play, not in-play, commercial, and then in basketball we added a free throw category. Here's what we found. Baseball and football actually have very similar gameplay profiles. Technically, the ball is only in play for about 25 minutes or 16% of an MLB game, while a football game is even lower at 16 minutes and 9% of the broadcast. Then the average play times were 5.3 seconds and 5.8 seconds respectively. But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Both of these sports are what I'd call distinct event sports, where every play is its own event. Games are just as much about strategy and positioning between plays as they are about execution, and the format can make for huge individual moments. On the other side of the coin, we have hockey and basketball. Both sports don't technically require stoppages, so you get longer flowing gameplay. In the NHL game we watched, 39% of the broadcast had the puck in play, with an average time between whistles of 58.5 seconds, the highest of any game we watched. The NBA had a similar percentage in average play time, but one thing we noticed was free throws. In total, free throws accounted for 9% of the broadcast, and 43% of the free throws came in the fourth quarter alone. When you're watching these two sports, you can get a better sense of flow and teamwork as you watch for long periods of uninterrupted time. Across all these sports, commercial breaks and intermissions took up about a quarter of the entire broadcast, while stoppages took up the rest. Follow for more sports data visualizations.
If you see me sitting in my office looking at my phone, I'm probably watching these because I think they're so fascinating, and I wish I could draw like that. They have a whole bunch of them. They're pretty new still, so there's not a ton, but quite a few out there. So I think this talks to two things. A, like how much downtime fans have when watching sports, hence why commercials are such a thing in sports, and the Super Bowl is one that we know the most about. But then also just how teams don't only need to engage fans in live games, but also on places like social media. And how do you do that in a way that is unlike anybody else? And I think this group, and they're not associated with a team, they are their own company, are really finding a niche. They also, for students, they do have a newsletter, and they post the code to make the Python version of this, not hand-drawn. So I recommend following their newsletter if you want their code. So the other way that people are engaging fans and working to get their hard-earned dollars is sports betting. And so this actually is not in production yet for any of the three major sports books in America. It's called BetVision. For this company specifically, it's called BetVision. Everyone has their own. And it's even become more important, as if anyone listened or heard about the Disney shareholder meeting a couple days ago. ESPN is moving forward with what they're calling Flagship, which is supposed to be a direct-to-consumer, all interactive sports streaming platform. Give me another buzzword and I'll throw it in there kind of thing. So we're gonna watch this. This is me recording a phone, so it gets a little janky, but we're good. If I tried to do a screen recording, it actually blacks out the broadcast. So they're smart like that. But anyways, what you're gonna see is the person who's helping me run the phone is gonna move through here, and how you can watch the game and see the odds change, and you can favorite different bets or different lines down here. And then we'll see bets for certain players, and then lightning bets, which are happening as the game goes on. So you'll see the first drive happen on the screen, and then when we get to lightning, you'll actually see bets for the second drive. So also people who are thinking data engineering for fan engagement stuff, think about the latency of that, how fast those odds have to be calculated and entered in, and then streamed out for someone to then place a bet and have that bet, in with the sports books in time for the whistle of the second drive. So we can go ahead and play this one.
Toss Nixon to the right, strung out, brought down. Play made by Brian Branch, the second-year player who's been outstanding for Detroit this year.
I tell you what, we've seen some plays out in the secondary already. Brian Branch probably in a pretty foul mood after getting kicked out of the game a week ago against the Green Bay Packers for one of those helmet-to-helmet hits. And he comes out and makes a statement early in this.
So you can see how interactive that is and how engaging that is to a fan. And then it has things like, if you click on this one down here, then it would take you to visualizations of the different interactive stats during the game, the next gen type stats, and then all the bet slips are underneath there. Also, Houston's uniforms look like highlighters to me. I'm just not a fan. So anyways, this isn't a video. I should have maybe made this a video. This is the first game of the World Series this past fall. And when I was watching these games, I'm always really impressed with how much information broadcasters are able to give the fans in like the tiniest little corner of the screen. Especially when, Mr. Vu was saying, we're all watching baseball now like on our phones. So, this is actually like, this big. And so in here we see, you just turn on your TV and this is the play that's happening, right? And instantly who's pitching, and then he just pitched. So like instantly you know what the pitch was and how fast it was. You know who's up to bat. You know stats for the evening, like at this point, these were extra innings, so he was 1 for 4. You know the score, you know the inning, you know how many outs, and you know that there's already someone on base. Like, when you think about it, that's a lot of information. And you couldn't do that if you didn't have it visually laid out nicely, right? Like, can you imagine like an Excel sheet like a little like tiny like Excel thing down there trying to display that information? So how you display this information really matters. And the human brain is really great at taking in that information if we display it well, right? And scale it and emphasize it. Because I'd also this will drop away in a second, and then I think it says his pitch count for the evening. So I just find that fascinating. I think baseball probably has like the most stuff that needs to be relayed in an instant. But I think they do it the best of some of the team of this sports. Okay, so the fans are really important. I get that. I'm a fan. I really want to be important. But like, who's the other really important person in sports? Say it again. The athletes. They're my favorite part of sports. They're the people I do most of my research on. So how are we conveying information to them? And this is actually a shot right from the company's website. For privacy reasons, I can't pull the UVA ones, but UVA uses this technology. This technology is called Perch. Perch is a camera that sits in the weight rack of the weight room. So you guys know like a weight rack that has like the, a traditional weight rack. So up on top, there's like a little camera. You wouldn't even know it's there unless I was like, hey, that's the Perch camera. What the Perch does is it takes a video and it uses computer vision to provide velocity-based information to the athlete. This is used for something called velocity-based training. For any of you who are into weightlifting, you might know the term. And what's great about this technology is before we would have to actually hook up like transducers to the barbell to capture this information. And now using computer vision, it's all done automatically, including knowing the lift the athlete is doing. So we don't have to say this athlete's doing a back squat. The computer vision just is like, oh, that's a back squat, which is pretty cool. So here what they're seeing, so the athletes get into the weight room, they turn on there's like, for men's basketball, there's a few iPads in every rack relaying the athlete information. This is one of the iPads that they're seeing. It would have their face up there. And then what's set here is, this is their goal for the weightlifting session. So for this person, it was accelerative strength. And then this green band is for them. Where do they need to stay? How fast does that barbell need to consistently move to hit this goal? And this then tells how much weight is on the bar. The computer vision actually can calculate the weight based on the plates. Like it knows the plates that we have, and it can just capture that for us. And so the athlete doesn't have to punch in anything into the system. So it makes their lift a lot more seamless. And then we can see they did five sets. I don't know how many reps. And then we see that they're above the green band, which usually means that we need to add weight, that this bar is too light. So instantly the coaches know to add weight. Now we're in the right zone, and then we drop. And so instead of just being like, oh, we're going to do the same weight, and we're just going to like, grunt it out, brute it out, here we can actually adapt quickly and say, hey, let's drop off X amount of weight so that you stay within your goal, okay? So that's pretty cool technology, and it makes that process of training much more seamless for the athlete. And that's one of our goals, is to make, not only to bring more technology in, but to use that technology to make the athletes' lives better, not just make it more of a lab condition for them. And then this next one is Oura Ring, which I'm sure many of you know. If you read the New York Times, you've seen a million ads for Oura lately. They just came out with their newest generation ring. Some athletes here at UVA use these rings to help track sleep and readiness. And this is, you can go ahead and play this one. It takes a little longer. So you can see on here, this is the app-based version. The athletes can access this if they want. Some of them don't like to know this information every day. But you can see we get these nice visuals at top saying how much sleep you had and what your resting heart rate was. You get this readiness score, which I'm not a big fan of, but whatever. And then down here, we see things like resting heart rate. And then we even say, because body temperature, we say optimal. How we're getting that is, it's just standard deviations from their baseline temperature. It's nothing magical in that. But instead of saying you're 2 standard deviations above or below your body temperature, they give you a qualitative, you're optimal, or, I think it's like, I can't remember what the other ones are off the top of my head. I should have maybe gotten one that was like red all over on there. But we're taking data and we're relaying to athletes, nuggets of information, not necessarily numbers. Some of them like the numbers. Some of them just want to know, so like, is my temperature good or bad, right? They want that, that human feeling interaction. And then down here, there's just charts for the people who like their actual numbers. Yeah, that was all I had on that one. And then I think I'm done, which is great because I think I have 5 minutes left, so that's a perfect amount of time for questions. If anyone has any questions or wants me to go back to a slide, yeah.
All right. So I have one is just you can do yes or no, because I'm interested in I notice with athletes it's always performance based, and I think about athletes that have off the field problems. Has anyone ever kind of thought about if they could predict maybe those kind of issues through psychological profile? Or
yeah. So yes, people have tried very hard to do that. This becomes an interesting situation between who's collecting that data. And so the sports teams themselves, there's questions about whether or not they should even be collecting data off the court. We shouldn't surveil athletes 24/7. That's a violation of their privacy. So who should be monitoring that becomes a question. Is it the CAPS team? Is it yeah, go ahead if you have an idea.
Oh, I was gonna say even, it doesn't necessarily have to be their everyday lives, how fast they're driving, things like that. But I know they kind of try to do it with Wonderlic, and then also those weird.
Oh, you're saying Wonderlic. Wonderlic is such a fun topic. Yeah. Oh, so you're like your grit,
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah, everyone's trying. No one's gotten it done yet, though. Because it's so funny. I love the fact that we love to study ourselves, study humans, because we're the most probabilistic things out there for a lot of things, right? Sometimes when we make models and we're better than a coin flip, I'm like, yeah. We're awesome. Because the physicists are oh yeah, we need R squared of 0.998 and then maybe it's okay. And I'm like, dude, if we get a 0.501, I'm super excited. Not really, but so yeah, that's the interesting thing about it is what people reveal versus what people actually do is also interesting. We can all understand that, what you put down in the survey versus what you actually do, at the doctor's office. It's always an interesting conundrum.
And then another question, kind of going into that, because I've noticed I wear a tracker all the time, and it's hard to vary your performance world with your medical. I saw HRV. And it's something that's nice to have, but I've noticed it's in medical settings, you're my HRV has kind of been on the low for 2 months.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of bridge those worlds?
So in sports, it's a lot easier because we're having those conversations about these newer metrics more. For most of us, when we go to our primary care doctor, they're worried about really big risks, not necessarily your HRV. And so that's just a lot of, we can't control what the medical world does. And our doctors are so overworked and there's a lot going on there. But in athletics, we're lucky in that, doctors are embedded, athletic trainers, psychologists, everyone's embedded in the team. And so we can have more nuanced conversations. And yes, it's hard to marry them. Things I didn't show because it's just really hard with privacy stuff is we have dashboards that show all of it together. So your perch data and your HRV. Like when your HRV was really high, did you have a hard time staying in your band for like the perch, like to stay within your goal band? Does that make sense? So we start to try to put some of those together in a more systematic way. And so for people who go on to do sports analytics, a lot of your job is just pulling together your data sets because they're all disparate and you have to find a way to pull them all together and start to make those insights across technologies. Yeah, a single technology rarely gives us a lot of information. 1 more minute, so 1 more question. Yeah.
What would you recommend is the best way to break into the sports analytics field? I know it can be very difficult and niche, and I think a lot of people just know other people.
Exactly. It's a lot of networking. And I think also understanding that you can do sports and not work with a sports team. So also broadening your horizon past the idea of like, I need to be in the dugout for the Minnesota Twins. Right, like if that's what you want to do, like there's ways to pursue that. But if you're like, I just want to work with sports data and in a sports environment, there's lots of other ways to do that, including more like these health companies that have a ton of analyst jobs open. But if you want to work with an individual team, usually experience and projects are the way to get noticed. And then you have to put out a lot of applications. Yeah, I wish it was easier, but networking is the best thing you can do as a student. Yeah. Okay, I think we're all set. So thank you everyone for coming today and being at Datapalooza. I'll be around for questions if anyone has any else. Thank you.